Good evening, everyone. And tonight I'm going to be talking about symbolic actions. It's the first of a series of what are symbolic actions used for in prophecy. And we're going to start with Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu has a lot of different symbolic actions used for different types. And what do I mean by symbolic actions? I mean where the prophet does something, and that is supposed to have some kind of meaning within the prophecy. All right, that's how I define a symbolic action. All right, so it can be something like, and we'll see with Yirmiyahu is good to kind of show us the whole range. It can be something where the prophet, like if you recall with Hosea, right? So he marries a woman, like that's a symbolic action, and then that's kind of the basis of the whole explanation of the relationship between God and his people, right? So that's a classic, symbolic action, but it could also be something much more minor. Here, do this thing, and that's this thing that takes 5 seconds, and that's a springboard to prophecy. So let's dive right in, and I think you'll see right away what I'm talking about in terms of Yirmiyahu. There's a prophecy that I've talked about more than once, which is of the loincloth. And I always remember it a little bit differently than what it is, because I remember it as being about Jerusalem, but really it's about the people. So let's dive in and see it. I will share my screen as usual. Here we go. Okay. All right. So just to remind you a little bit, actually, you know what? I'm going to unshare for a second. Just to remind you about the history of Yirmiyahu. Right. So Yirmiyahu is speaking, he's prophesying through the period of his prophecy is approximately 610 to 586. All right. And what happens is, so he starts prophesying under Yoyakim, and Yoyachin is exiled. There are different levels of rebellion against Babylonia. So you first, when you rebel, if you're a vassal state and you rebel, so one of the things they do is they take the king, and what they did was they took the king with a group of the nobility and they exiled him, and they put in a puppet king, namely Tzidkiyahu, right? So a very important kind of thing that happens under Yirmiyahu is this exile, the initial exile. So he's prophesying before that initial exile. Okay, so he prophesies from 610. So he's prophesying before that initial exile. And then when Yehoiachin rebels against Babylonia, he is there. We have what's called Galut Yehoiachin, the exile of Yehoiachin, which is the exile of the nobility. The nobility is exiled, and there are still people in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is still a functioning city with officers, with some kind of functioning nobility. Yechezkel is with the guys who are in that initial exile. So Yechezkel has to deal with what it means to be part of that initial exile while there are still people in Jerusalem, right? But Yirmiyahu is with the people in Jerusalem. The people in Jerusalem their king is Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu is Yehoiachin's uncle, and he is placed as a ruler by Babylonia, right? By Babylon. They take him and they say, okay, you're going to be our puppet king. All right. So he's the puppet king. The problem is he also doesn't like Babylonia, and it doesn't take that long for him to rebel too. Right now, part of what Yirmiyahu is kind of arguing with is, don't rebel against Babylonia. This isn't going to end anywhere good. Right? This is the kind of constant refrain. And also the Jerusalem and the people are not protected because they've been sinning. If you're sinning, then you can't count on God for protection. And also, guys, make nice with Babylonia because they're going to win. Right? You're just going to get destroyed. Stop with these dreams of being independent of Babylonia. It's not going to happen. And because of the popular sentiment, which is we don't want to be under Babylonia, and we should not be. It's part of kind of our destiny, right? To not be under Babylonia. It's part of what, and it's coming to us to be independent. So you have a lot of false prophets. You have a lot of prophets running around saying we're going to be free of Babylonia, and kind of encouraging this rebellion. And Yirmiyahu is speaking against them. And that's kind of that's Yirmiyahu's constant struggle until finally there's a siege, and still there's this kind of argument, and then finally Jerusalem falls. Yirmiyahu goes out, and then he's with Gedaliahu ben Achikam. There's a possibility that because Babylonians know that Yirmiyahu was kind of their guy inside. In other words, he was pro-Babylonian. He was in the pro-Babylonian group. So they have they're like, hey, where do you want to go? You want to come with us? And Yirmiyahu's like, no, I'm staying with these guys. And yeah, I see your question, Danny, just a second. Then when Gedaliahu is murdered, that is the last chance that the people of Jerusalem have to perhaps be able to come back to Jerusalem. Because if you remember, they go out of Jerusalem, but they're still in Israel. They're not completely exiled when they're with Gedaliahu. It's when he's murdered that the Babylonians are like, that is it. Okay, guys, we cannot, you guys are not going to stop rebelling. You guys are completely exiled, forget it. Okay, so that's why we fast for Gedaliahu, even though as the joke says, he wouldn't have fasted for us. Still, we're not really fasting for him specifically. We're fasting, well, because he was a decent leader, but also because that was our last chance of maybe not being exiled completely in the Babylonian exile. So Yirmiyahu goes, he's prophesying at different stages, and he has different messages, as we will see. He has enough symbolic actions that this we might end up having to split this in two, but they're pretty engaging, as you will see. Now, I saw a question which was, is there any indication Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel knew each other or influenced each other in any way? I do not recall seeing any kind of influence. You know what, I would want to look up. I don't remember any evidence of any sort of direct influence. There's nothing to indicate they knew each other. It would be a little surprising if they are in fact sending these letters back and forth. It would be surprising if they didn't know each other, I would think. Yirmiyahu is, as we'll see, Yirmiyahu is supposed to be sending letters to the exiles with a prophecy. And I would think that Yechezkel would be important enough among the exiles for them to say, oh, here's this letter from a prophet. And he says, we're not coming back, right? I would think that would be something that, the influences, they both cite the same phrase, right? They both cite avot achlu boser v'shinei banim tikena. The fathers ate unripe grapes and the children's teeth are dulled, right? And the meaning of that phrase is, we're suffering for what our parents did. Yirmiyahu cites that, and he says, in the future, like at the end of days, like in the Messianic era, that will not be true. You will not suffer for what your parents did. Yechezkel says, this is not true now. You say that, but it is not true. You are not punished for what your parents do. You only suffer for what you do. Everyone is responsible for themselves. It's an interesting contrast between Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel. I've talked a lot about what this kind of means in terms of collective responsibility and the ideas of collective responsibility, and how that kind of finally breaks down once you have one group of Jews or Judeans, or whatever you want to say, in exile, and another in Judea itself with clearly different, at the time what seems to be clearly different paths and destinies. So that is a clear parallel between Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel. At the same time, there is no correspondence between them, as you would almost want, unless Yirmiyahu was not taken that seriously outside of Judea either. Remember that to us, so Yirmiyahu is the one guy speaking truth, but he's constantly being put in jail. So, and Yechezkel is very much accepted by his community, it seems. Like he's taken very seriously. So it's possible that Yirmiyahu could have actually written the letter that it says he's supposed to write, and no one paid attention, right? And Yechezkel's just not paying attention because he doesn't even know about this guy who is from Anatot, which is not necessarily a big deal place, right? Anyway, And Yechezkel's from Jerusalem. Yechezkel's from that original nobility. Those the top, the cream of society. That's who Yechezkel goes out with, right? Yechezkel is one of the top Jerusalem people. So, he's one of them at least. Okay. I see I'm losing people. Let's dive into Yirmiyahu. Okay, here we go. All right. So I am going into the story I cite all the time, which is Yirmiyahu Yud Gimel. You guys see the text, right? Okay, good. All right. So here we have a classic example of symbolic action. God said to me, Haloch v'kanita lecha ezor pishtim. Okay, go and buy a linen loincloth. And it's a girdle. It's something that goes around your hips, right? V'samto al matnecha, right? Put it on your hips. It's not. Is it on your hips? Is it actually on your loins? Is like loincloth is like underpants. Okay, uvamayim lo tiviyehu. Don't put it in water. Veknet ezor kidvar Hashem v'simat l'nai. So he did. He takes it and he wears it. Vayidvar Hashem elad sheni more. He comes to him again and says, Kachate ezor asher kanita asher al motnecha v'kum lech prata v'tamnehu sham b'niki kasala. He says, okay, take that, all right, and go to Nahar Prat, which is Wadi Farah, Nachal Prat rather. It's Wadi Farah. Wadi Farah starts 4 kilometers northeast of Anatot, and it goes down to Wadi Kelt, and eventually goes to Yericho. So go to this river, which one assumes Yirmiyahu knew well. It's from where he's from, and take this girdle or loincloth and put it in a crack in the rock. So you're taking it to a wet place. You're putting it in a stone. Beforehand, he didn't put it. He said, "Don't put it in water." Why? Because this way it's gonna stay, and you're not. And maybe there's an idea also that you're not letting it kind of get used to being wet, right? So just put it in this crack in the rock. So that's what he does. He does what God told him. So he says, okay, now go after many days, right? Go and get it and take it out. All right. So he does, he goes, he digs, he takes it out, and Lo yitzlach lakol. Okay, the loincloth is completely ruined. You can't use it for anything. One assumes it's rotted, right? It's completely rotten. It's probably completely disintegrating. You can't use it for anything. All right. So again, what is the symbolic action? Here's something which Yirmiyahu genuinely wore for a while, right? He wore it close to his body, right? It was the most basic garment. Right, close to his body, he wore it. Now he can't use it for anything. Okay. God said, the word of God was to him saying, this is the way I'm going to destroy the pride of Yehuda and the pride of Jerusalem, the great pride of Jerusalem. Ha'am hazeh hara ha'me'anim lishmot dvarai ha'olchem b'shvirut libam ve'yelchu achrei Elohim acherim lo'avdam u'lishtachavot lahem v'hi ka'ezor hazeh asher lo yitzlach lakol. So he says, this nation, this evil nation that refuses to listen to me, that goes according to the stubbornness of their hearts and go after other gods, worshiping them and bowing down to them, they're like this loincloth that's no good for anything. Ki kasher yidbak ha'ezor el monei ish, ken hidbakti elai et kol beit Yisrael ve'et kol beit Yehuda ne'um Adonai liot li la'am u'lishem l'tila u'litifaret v'lo shameu. He says, just as a person sticks the loincloth close to him and puts it around him. That's what I did with the house of Israel, right? I kind of stuck them around me. They were so close to me, the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda, to be my nation, to be a nation for me, to be my nation. And I made them famous. I gave them a name and glory, and they didn't listen to me. So here again, what do we have? The idea is, yes, they were my nation. I brought them close. They were my loincloth, quote unquote, or my, my girdle, you want to call it, but I think loincloth is better here. They were as close as you could get to me. I brought them close to me, but now they are worthless to me. They are worthless because they don't listen to me. So this thing that they say to themselves, hey, we're God's people. God wouldn't let this happen to us. Yeah, you were God's people, but now that you're evil or wicked, or you're not listening to God, you are like a worthless, rotten loincloth that you have no purpose. You don't have this status anymore, right? So, and then he goes into a kind of a twist on a phrase. He says, that every kol nevel yimale yayin, right? That every bottle is filled with wine, and they're like, don't we know that? And he's like, no, you think that it's talking about prosperity, and I'm telling you that I'm going to destroy you and fill you with drunkenness. In general, just so you know, especially with Purim coming, it's always in general in prophecies, in prophecies, biblical prophecies, it's drinking is bad. Like giving someone to drink, it's either poison or it's getting them drunk, and it's considered a bad thing. And it's kind of a theme. But at any rate, so the idea is that on the one hand, yes, you were close to me. On the other hand, now, because you're no good, you are worthless, and your closeness is not going to save you. I see that there is a comment or a question. So Robert asked, but this essentially compares Israel to a piece of underwear. Is that good? Well, so that's what I'm saying. You can call it a girdle, right? I think the idea is supposed to be that this is as close as you can get. If you're reading it as a loincloth, certainly in ancient times, I mean, a man's loins were also saying something, right? So you're close to God's power, as it were, right? So like, it's also this kind of thing that it's as close as you can get, right? It's the most basic garment you can wear, right? So I don't think that it's meant to be a negative thing here. On the other hand, on the contrary, it sounds like the point is that it's a very important garment, right? The point is a very important garment that's super close to you. And that surrounds you, which is also a big point. It surrounds you, as the people of Israel, especially the people in Jerusalem, think that they surround the house of God, right? God lives among us, as it were, right? So I think that's the point here. Susan says, a reversed analogy, a loincloth clothes protects a person who wears it. And the analogy here is reversed. God is the protector and Israel, Judah is the loincloth. I think the loincloth is not supposed to be protective here for just that reason, Susan, because the point is not supposed to be that Israel protects God. And we are supposed to kind of taking this as a lesson. So the idea is not so much the loincloth protects, it's that the loincloth is very close and surrounds. That seems to be the idea. The loincloth is not particularly protective. It's not really armor. I mean, better than nothing, I guess, but it's not really supposed to be a particularly protective garment. So that's one example. And in this example, if you'll notice, Yirmiyahu is playing the part of God, as it were. Right? Yirmiyahu is kind of walking in God's shoes. God's like, here's your loincloth. Do you see that once it's ruined, it's ruined? It was your loincloth. You wore it, but now it's worth nothing. The same way Israel is to me. Now, Yirmiyahu, you understand. And you can convey this to Yehuda and Israel. Right? That's not the way all symbolic actions in Yirmiyahu works, but it's an interesting way that symbolic actions can work specifically in Yirmiyahu. Let's if no one has any more comments or questions, let's move on to the next example.
I just have a geographical comment, just an observation about Prat, about Nachal Prat, which in formal usage today is used as the official name for Wadi Kelt. As far as I can tell, this is the first mention in the Tanakh of Prat in reference to Wadi Kelt, because previously in the Tanakh, especially in Sefer Yoshua, it's referred to simply as Hanachal. And it comes at the time of Yirmiyahu when there are Jews already living on the rivers of Babylon, so they're familiar with the real Nahar Prat, and 99.9% of the time, Wadi Kelt is a pathetic little creek. It's a gorgeous creek, but it's a pathetic little creek. But 0.1% of the time, when you have a sequence, an unusual sequence of torrential rains, it turns into the Colorado River. And I can imagine people who are saying, wow, this is just like Nahar Prat. Let's call it that.
It's a cute idea. Let's say I like that. Okay, so moving on from Nachal Prat. So our next example is Ted Zion, and this is a little bit more like Hosea, right? Where we're looking at Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu has his own commandment regarding a wife and children. And here we have the word of God is me saying, Lo tikach lecha isha v'lo yiyu lecha banim ubanot b'makom hazeh. You shall not take a wife, and you will not have sons and daughters in this place. Okay, and the in this place is deliberate. It's not. We could absolutely read this and say, okay, once he's exiled, he can take a wife and kids. The point is, well, first of all, no one wants to be exiled, right? This is where he's living, and he's not. He's not counting on being exiled. But the idea is, forget it. You're not staying here long. Right. And you are going to symbolize this to everyone, because you're not going to take a wife and you're not going to have kids. Okay. Kicho amar Adonai al habanim v'al habanot hayilodim b'makom hazeh v'al imotam hayodototam v'al avotam hamolidim otam ba'aretz hazot. So this is what God says about the sons and daughters who are born in this place, about the mothers who give birth to them, about the fathers who cause them to be born, right, in this land. Mimote tachaluim yamutu, lo yisavdu v'lo yikaveru l'domen al pnei hadama yiyu. This is pretty horrific. They are going to die horrible deaths. They're not going to get a eulogy, and they will not be buried. They're going to be spread like fertilizer on the ground, over the ground, right? Why? Uvacherev uvara'av yichlu, because they're going to die by the sword and by hunger. Their bodies are going to be food for the birds and beasts of the heaven and earth. So that's pretty horrible, right? And he continues, it kind of repeats, right? That there's not that young and old are going to die. Okay, there's going to be a war. Yeah, there's going to be a war, and there's going to be siege. What's the hunger? Is siege, and also, of course, the whole salt the earth thing that soldiers do, and also that soldiers kind of go through and grab all the food. So they're going to die of hunger and the sword, and their bodies are just going to be lying out there. So you, Yirmiyahu, Yirmiyahu, don't take a wife and have children, because everyone's just going to die, right? So don't do it. Right. So Yirmiyahu is showing this. Now let's contrast this with a later chapter. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and we're going to go to Yirmiyahu Chavtet, Jeremiah 29. Okay. And this is a letter that Yirmiyahu is supposed to write to the captives in Babylon. Right. So the captives in Babylon, who the earlier captives, right? And the ones who went out with Yechonia. This is Golut Yehoiachin, right? So this is that initial exile. of the nobility and the high up people in of Jerusalem. He says to him, "Bnu batim v'shevu v'nit'u ganot v'chlu et piryan." Build houses and dwell there, plant gardens and eat their fruit. K'u nashim v'holidu banim uvanot. Uk'u lebnechem nashim ve'pnotechem tnu lanashim v'teladna banim uvanot revusham ve'al tim'atu. So you should take wives, saying to the people who have been exiled, guys, this is where you're living now. This is where you're going to stay. You're staying in Babylon. You're not coming back, right? Since you're exiled to Babylon, and you're not, and I, God, am telling you, you're not coming back, right? So build houses there, plant gardens, get married there, have children there, and marry off your children. You're going to be there for a while, right? V'dirshu et shlom ha'ir asher higleti etchem shama v'hitpalu ba'ada el Hashem ki v'shloma yeh lechem shalom. And you should actually ask for the well-being of that city. You should pray to God that the city does well, because if it does well, you do well, because this is where you're living now. You're not coming back from Babylon. All right. So this is in contrast, okay, to what Jeremiah is told: don't marry or have kids, because in this land, everyone's going to be killed. Okay. Now, also, I do want to, and of course, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, this also contrasts with the field. If we go to Hanam El's field, and we're going to get to that in a bit. Hanam El's, because it's also another symbolic action. On the one hand, you have the prophecies before the exile, and the prophecies when exile is imminent. Once it becomes clear that exile is, that there's a siege and they're going to lose, that's when there are prophecies with hope, right? So the prophecies with hope also have symbolic actions. We're going to get to that soon when we talk about Hanam El's field. Okay, so bear with me because I want to keep in the order. Now, of course, it is true that the order in Yirmiyahu is not a chronological order, and they're frequently juxtaposed because of the theme. And that's what we're going to see in the next symbolic action. There are two symbolic actions that are placed right next to each other, and they really contrast with the idea that they're putting across. Okay, so here in chapter 18, Perek Yud Chet, right, we read, this is what God says to him. He says, Kum v'yaralta bet hayotzer v'shama ashmiacha et dvarai. Go to the potter's house, like the potter's workshop, and I will there. That's where you're going to get the prophecy. Ve'ered bet hayotzer v'nehu osem melacha al hovnai. Okay, so he gets there and he's making something on the potter's wheel. V'nishchat hakli asher hu oseh b'chomer b'yad hayotzer v'shav v'yasehu kli acher kasher yashar b'nei hayotzer lasot. So what happens? He's doing it, and I'm sure we've all seen potters at the wheel. The thing that he's working on gets ruined. It gets crumpled up. So he crumples it up, and then he makes it into a different pot, makes it into something else, right? Whatever he wants to do. Okay. And so God says to him, "Hachayotzer hazeh lo uchal lasot lachem Beit Yisrael no'am Adonai hinei kachomer b'yad hayotzer ken atem b'yadi Beit Yisrael." And yes, this is where the tefillah on Yom Kippur, this is where the prayer in Yom Kippur comes from, right? That God can do with us as a potter does with his kind of ceramics on the wheel. So God says, can't I be like this potter? Can't I do with you like this potter does, house of Israel? Because just as the clay is in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand, house of Israel. Rega adaber al goy v'mamacha lintosh ula'avid v'shav hagoy hahu mera'ato asher dibarti alav v'nichamti al hara'a asher chashavti lasot lo. in one moment, I will decide about a nation or a kingdom to absolutely uproot it and destroy it. And that if that nation repents and returns from its evil, I will change my mind of what I did to him. So in other words, I can change it just in the same way as the potter was making a pot. And he's like, you know what? I was going to make a bowl, but no, I'm going to make a teapot. And he does it without a big deal. I do the same thing. And that's what you are in my hands. That's what all the nations are in my hands. And the same thing, and at one point I would say, yes, I want to build and plant with this nation and kingdom. And they do bad, and I say, okay, I changed my mind and about the good things I was going to do for it. Okay. And what's the lesson to the house of Israel or the house of Yehuda? Vata emarna el ish Yehuda val yoshvei Yerushalayim lemor, ko amar Adonai hine anochi yotzer alechem ra'ah v'choshev alechem machshava shuvu na ish midarko hara'ah ve'tivu darchechem u'malalechem. Right. So tell the people of Yehuda and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so says God, I am creating for you, but I am a potter, right, for you, right? And I'm thinking, I'm planning evil, right? So it's a play on words, Yotzer, right? I'm planning evil for you. I'm intending, I'm thinking a thought, I'm making a plan, right, of evil. Return each person from his evil path and make your and improve your deeds, right? And the idea is, guys, you're doing evil, but God's like a potter, right? He can reverse it. Like he may be intending to do evil to you now, because that's what Yirmiyahu keeps telling them. But if you repent, he'll change it. He'll change it. So it's twofold. One is that you're completely in the power of God, the way clay is in the hands of the potter, right? On the other hand, God can change what he's planning based on what you do. So you still have a chance. All right, you still have a chance. Don't just say, "Oh no, forget it." And you have in the next verse, "V'amru no'ash," and they're like, "No, there's no hope already. It's done." Ki achrei machshavotenu nelech v'ish riud libo hara na'aseh. So what we're going to do is we're each going to do whatever we want. We're just going to do bad because it's too late. It's too late. And the answer is no. God, on the one hand, the powers, it's his power, and also he can always change his mind. And in the very next chapter, we have another symbolic action which uses ceramics in a very different way, right? Ko amar Adonai, haloch v'kanita bakbuk yotzer chares umiziknei ha'am umiziknei ha'kohanim. So you should go and get a ceramic bottle. They said earthen bottle. It was ceramic. And take people who are from the elders of the Kohanim and the elders of the nation, because they need to see this. All right. Let's pause for just a bit. Oh, I see there are a bunch of chats here. So just a second. I want to pause for just a bit and note who was the audience of the symbolic action in the last chapter, right? In the one where it was clay that we were talking about, as opposed to finished ceramics. Clay, who's the audience? Who has to see it? Yirmiyahu has to see it. Yirmiyahu has to see and understand, right? He has to actually go and watch a potter and understand that this is the way God acts with Israel. It's similar to the Loincloth episode, where it's the important thing is for Yirmiyahu as a prophet to really get it. Then he can tell the people, right? But Yirmiyahu is the audience of the symbolic action. In the next chapter, we're going to see that that's not the case anymore. The important thing, Yirmiyahu has to do this in front of representatives of the people. It's a part of the prophecy itself. Now I see there are a bunch of chats, so I'm going to pause here for a second. Okay, here we are. Didn't the medieval Mefarshim misidentify Nahal Prat as the Euphrates? Yeah, you would expect them to identify it as the Euphrates because usually it is the Euphrates, right? So it's not surprising, but he didn't go all the way to the Euphrates. Yirmiyahu stayed pretty local. Was the action with the loincloth not intended at all for the people to know about, just for Yirmiyahu himself? We did find out about it. Yes, I do think that in fact the loincloth was meant for Yirmiyahu to know and then to really understand it, but the words also conveyed it. Like in other words, the words were like, okay, guys, you're just like a loincloth. I think he is supposed to tell it over, but he is the first audience. He's the one who's really got to get it. Okay. Not marrying, another comment, not marrying or having kids does not seem like a noticeable action. It's paired with the prophecy. It's the same way with Hosea. You know, if Hosea marries a woman and you're like, huh, that's a weird woman for him to marry. That's unusual, right? But it goes along with the prophecy, right? It's not just him doing it. So the same way Yirmiyahu not marrying, God says, don't marry. And here's the prophecy that goes along with it. It would be pretty unusual for Yirmiyahu. I mean, he's living for a while. He prophesies that he's got more than 20. Yeah, he's got more than 20 years of prophecy, right? So so that's a long time to prophesy and not get married. And that's a long time to live as an adult and not get married. Especially, I would imagine in the ancient world, you would be expected to get married and have children in that time. He's got this prophecy that goes along with it. So I think that's the issue, not just not marrying and not explaining it to anyone, but having a prophecy that goes along with it and explains what the story is. Okay, so moving on to, yes.
Just one last comment about Nahal Prat. The context very, very clearly places it in Yehuda. So if the Mefarshim, I don't know if the Mefarshim really did mistake it for the Euphrates, it seems to me that they were way off base. They just didn't understand the text.
Sorry,
yes,
I did. This is actually a case point about early biblical modern scholarship. Was when in the early 20th century, people started to go and say the Mefarshim just must have got it wrong, that they identified Prat, and some says, no, they can't be wrong, they're the Mefarshim. It took some quite brave modern Orthodox scholars at that time to say it can't be the Euphrates, it must be what we now know to be the Nahal Prat. And that was actually quite controversial.
That's why one of the things you do is you point to the Ramban, Nachmanides, who after he went to the land of Israel, revised a lot of what he said previously. So that's one of the things they always like to point to in the traditional things, like, look, he revised it after he saw the country and he realized he'd gotten certain things wrong. But it's true that with a lot of, but thank you very much, Robin. And yeah, this is like one of those things. I always, it's interesting what you say, like, it's interesting how important this idea is to certain people in terms of, well, how could they possibly have gotten it wrong? They say it's this. And but I think certainly modern Orthodoxy has moved away from that. But it makes sense that they would just say, oh, well, there's one Nahal Prat. I guess he just went all the way to the Euphrates and did this. And you could understand why they would say that. Anyway. Okay, so moving right along. Let's go back to our text. Okay. Here we have kind of a companion piece, but you can see that one assumes that there was a fairly big gap between the two. Probably you don't know for sure, right? But this is going to do this has a very different message than the previous one. And here you have Yirmiyahu is not the main first audience. He's taking people from the elders and the Kohanim, the priests. You guys still see the text, right? Yeah. Okay. Good. So he's going to go to V'yatzata El Gei Ben Hinnom. You're going to the valley of Ben Hinnom. Asher Petach Shar HaCharsit. V'karat Hashem et dvarim asher adaber elecha. So this is by the Charsit gate, right? So is it kind of a potter's gate? Like is it a pun? Is this a place where they used to have a lot of crushed vessels? At any rate, this is the gate you're going to go to. And Vamarta Shim'u Dvar Adonai Malchei Yehuda v'Yoshvei Yerushalayim Ko Amar Adonai Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael Hineni Mevi Ra'a Al HaMakom Hazeh Asher Kol Shom'a Titzalna Oznam. So God is saying, I'm going to bring evil because you left me. I'm going to do this quickly because you left me, because you built high places to Baal and you burned then people burned their children in fire as sacrifices to the Baal, and of course their opposite gate Ben Hinnom, where supposedly this was happening. Like this is the valley where they had supposedly this was one of the places they were doing that. Since you left me and you sacrificed to other gods that you didn't know and your forefathers didn't know, and this place has been filled with innocent blood. Oh, I went back a verse, sorry. So and this is important. And Uvanuat banot habal. Sorry, I'm repeating. Uvanuat banot habal lisrofet b'nehem ba'esh olot labal, and they built the high places to Baal to burn their sons in fire as sacrifices to Baal. Asher lo tziviti v'lo dibarti v'lo alta alibi, which I did not command and I did not speak and I didn't even think of. There are many who point to this verse and say, aha, there apparently was an idea that God wanted this, that God wanted these sacrifices, or at least passing through fire. This was something that people thought that the Israelite God wanted. And so you have this line here. I didn't even think of this. Like, what are you doing, right? That people thought that this was an appropriate form of worship. And so the idea is that this valley is going to be called the Valley of Killing, because in this place, the Judeans are going to die by the sword before their enemies. Okay. Uvakoti tatzat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim b'makom hazeh v'yipaltim b'cherev lefnei oivehem uviyad mikvakshei nafsham v'natati et nivlatam lema'achal le'of hashamayim u'le'amat ha'aretz. So once again, we see they're going to die by the sword and their bodies are going to be eaten by beasts and birds. Okay. And it just gets worse. I'm going to make this city a shame and a hissing. Everyone who walks by it is going to like hiss about all the horrible things that happen to it. It's like this place itself is almost like a curse because it had such a bad ending. And of course, there's a classic, they're going to eat their kids' flesh, and they're going to eat each other. Because of the siege, because there are going to be sieges and the distress that the enemy is going to place in them. And so they're going to eat each other and their children. Okay, that's the classic, the depths that people will fall to in a siege. And then after this prophecy, you break the bottle in front of them, right? V'amarta alehem, ko amar Adonai tzvaot, kacha eshbor et ha'am hazeh ve'et ha'ir hazot, kasher yishbor et kli hayotzer, asher lo yuchal leherafeh od. So this is how I'm going to break this nation and this city, right? Remember we talked about Jerusalem, how they had this idea that Jerusalem has to be saved. I'm going to break this nation and the city, these people rather, and this city. The way that you break a ceramic vessel, it can't be repaired. right? And you will be buried in the Tophet without, you're not gonna have a burial place. You're just gonna be left here. Also like ceramic shards, right? So ceramic shards, you break ceramics, you just leave it on the floor. Anyone who's been in an archaeological dig or seen an archaeological dig knows how that is. Just tons of, in certain places at least, tons of just ceramic fragments all over the place. Why bother cleaning it up? And that's what happens to ceramics. That's what's going to happen to your bodies, right? You're just going to be left there. Okay. The point of this is the absolute opposite of the companion piece that we saw before. The whole point of the companion piece was, listen, guys, God's like a potter. You can still fix this. You can still fix it. You're the clay on the wheel. You can still fix what's going to happen. The point of this chapter is, no, it's too late. There's no fixing this. You're broken. The jug is going to be broken. You won't be able to be fixed. Just like a ceramic jug is broken and can't be fixed. That's what's going to happen. Okay. There's actually, you could actually look at prophecies in Yirmiyahu and see the switch. You can't, it's hard to put a point on the switch because so many of the prophecies in Yirmiyahu don't have a clear chronological context. But you see this idea, on the one hand, guys, you can still fix it. It's all malleable, right? God has total control. He's like a potter at the wheel, but you're on the wheel. Guys, you can change. Here, forget it. It's done. It's baked in, right? You're done now. It's broken and it can't be fixed. So it's a completely different message in this prophecy and a symbolic action that's done in a violent way in front of the leaders of the people. I see that there are some questions and comments. So Susan says, I think I remember from high school that the Karsit gate was where broken pottery shards were discarded. Well, it makes sense. In other words, it's got a name that seems to indicate pottery, right? The Karsit gate. So it would make sense that it could also be near where they made pottery, right? That would also make sense. The Titzalna and Dani and Libby say Titzalna Oznav is a term also used in the vision of Shmuel regarding the punishment coming to the sons of Eli. Is this a term reserved for punishment of people of authority behaving blasphemously? I don't think so, because I don't think so. You could say that it's what no. I don't think so, because if you look at the context here, Titzalna Oznav, his ears are gonna burn, or it says tingle, anyone who hears it is gonna, it's part of the total destruction of the place and the people. So it makes sense that it's linked to kind of this total destruction. The idea is it's such a horrible and comprehensive destruction that anyone who hears it is going to be like, oh my God, that's horrendous, right? So it's that sort of connection. So to return to our text here, so we have two kind of companion pieces, and we see how the symbolic action is different and using ceramics, right, to say two very different things, right? And with the second one, which is a much more much harsher one, the important audience here is actually the leaders of the people rather than Yirmiyahu himself. Yirmiyahu is simply doing something as part of the prophecy to try and get this through to them with this violent breaking of the pot. So I'm going to continue. We have a little bit of time left, and I really do want to, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to do the next parts quickly. Okay, so there are two other important symbolic actions I wanted to discuss in Yirmiyahu. The next one is we're going to Yirmiyahu chapter 27, Parakuf Zion, and this is the yoke that Yirmiyahu has to wear around his neck. All right. Now, the first verse here is kind of problematic. It says in the beginning of the kingdom of Yoyakim. It seems like it can't be that because in the continuation it's talking about Tzidkiyahu, and I spoke to Tzidkiyahu. So it can't be the beginning of the time of Yoyakim, right? Because it's Yoyakim is the father of Yoyachin, and is the father of Yoyachin. it's and this verse, I believe this verse at least, is missing from the Septuagint. The understanding in general is that this verse was kind of missing and someone put it in, to give it a title of when it was happening, and they got it wrong. So this is probably happening during the time of Tzidkiyahu, actually. So what does God say? So you have to make the whole yoke, the bands, the wood with the bars, you're going to put yourself in a yoke. All right. That's what you should do. And this is also it's not really send them. This also seems to be something of a mistake. It's essentially, you should send to all these other kings and to Tzidkiyahu, the king of Yehuda, and you should command them, saying, this is what God said: I created the earth, I created man and beast, and with my great strength, etc., etc. And I, God, created all these lands, and I gave them to Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. Okay. Remember that this is a classic thing, that the rise of empire is a real problem for a monotheist. How? Because normally in the ancient world, if they win, that means their God is stronger than my God. If you're a monotheist and you believe your God is it, how do you explain this? So here is the explanation. God wants this. This is all from God. God created everything, and he gave it to Nebuchadnezzar. And now all you guys have to serve him. Right? All the nations have to serve him. Bet Ben-Beno, and his son and his grandson. He's going to have a dynasty, and you guys all have to serve him, right? And if any nation that doesn't serve Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, and that doesn't put his neck in the yoke of the king of Babylonia, I'm going to kill them off by sword and by hunger and by disease, right? Ad tumi otam biado, until they're finished, right? So and don't listen to all the false prophets, blah 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 blah. Okay. So Yirmiyahu has to now, in order to symbolize that all these nations, but especially Yehuda, need to be in the yoke of the king of Babylon, he's got to walk around with a yoke. And he's walking around with a yoke. He makes a yoke, he's walking around with a yoke, right? He's a prophet. Prophets do nutty things like that. It's not easy, but he does it, right? And it's clear that if anyone says, hey, why are you walking around with a yoke? He'll be like, because we're supposed to be in the yoke of Babylon, okay? So what happens? I want to make sure I have the right, wrong thing, just a sec. So what happens? Of course, after a while, it came to pass the same year, right? In the year of the events of the end of the previous chapter. Amar Elai Hananya ben Azor, Hanavi Shabigvon, Bevet Adonai Le'nei Kohanim B'chol Am Le'mar. So what happens? Yirmiyahu is going around with his yoke on his neck, and in the 4th year, 5th month of Tzidkiyahu, Hananya, the son of Azor, a prophet from Givon, goes up to him in the temple area, and he says, Ko amar Adonai tzvaot Elohei Yisrael lemar shavarti et ol melech Bavel. He says, so says God, I have broken the yoke of Babylon. Okay, in 2 years, I'm going to bring back, I'm just paraphrasing, in 2 years, as the prophecy continues, I'm going to bring back to this place all of the vessels of the house of God that Nebuchadnezzar took, right? And Yechoniah is going to come back, right? All the exiles are going to come back. It's going to be great. This is what Hananiah the prophet says. And in fact, he if we could skip ahead to verse 10, Vayikach Hananya hanavi et hamotam me'al tzava Yirmiyahu hanavi v'yishbareu. He breaks the yoke from Yirmiyahu, right? So he that has his own symbolic action, right? We're gonna get rid of the yoke of Bavel. I am breaking the yoke of Yirmiyahu, right? Vayomer Hananya le'nei kol am le'mor kol amar Hashem kacha eshbor et ol Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel ba'od shnatayim yamin. And Hananya says to everyone, in front of everyone, all the people, he says, so God says, so I will break the yoke of Bavel, right? And that's when, and this is after Yirmiyahu has explained to him, right? Now, realize Yirmiyahu is kind of walking around like he doesn't know, maybe this guy's for real, right? And that's why we have the intervening verses, right? So Hananya, when he first says his prophecy, before he breaks the yoke, right? Yirmiyahu kind of gives him a warning. He says, "Vayomer Yirmiyahu Navi, Amen ken yaseh Adonai, yakem Adonai et dvarecha, asher nibeti la'ashiv klei beit Adonai v'chol hagolah miBavel el hamakom hazeh." Yirmiyahu says, "Sure, let God do this. May God establish your words. May He bring them true. May they come true, right? That you said that all the vessels are going to come back to the temple, and all the exiles are going to come back from Babylon to this place." Achshman, this is the first time we have this rule. But listen to this thing that I'm telling you and everyone here, right? The before us, there were lots of prophets that they prophesied about great kingdoms, that there's going to be war and evil and disease and all that. Hanavi asher yinavel shalom bevod dvar hanavi yivada hanavi asher shlacho Adonai be'emet. That prophet who prophesies good things, when that comes true, you know that he's a true prophet. He really spoke in the word of God. All right. Right. Where's the right? I'm missing it now. Right. In other words, the idea is, and I'm missing the verse where it says it. And the idea is, when there's a bad prophecy, if it doesn't come true, what does that mean? Does it mean he's a false prophet? Everyone's muted. If there's a bad prophecy and it doesn't come true, does it mean he's a false prophet? No, he's not a false prophet. It means everyone repented and God changed his mind. But if he has a good prophecy, right, and it doesn't come true, right, then what does that mean? That means he is a false prophet. So Yirmiyahu is saying, listen, buddy, you're saying something good. If it doesn't come true, you're a false prophet. I really hope you're coming. Yeah, I really hope it'll come true. But you're taking a risk, right? And in fact, there is a prophecy right away against Hananya. God's like, you're a false prophet, right? And Hananya dies in that year in the 7th month. Right, so this happens in the 5th month. He dies. Hananya dies 2 months later. He is a false prophet. Okay. Now the final. Just bear with me for just a few minutes. I see someone wrote a question. Is Yehoiachin synonymous with Yechonia from the Megillah?
Asked and answered.
What? Asked
and answered.
Okay. Cool. So moving along. Okay, so what's the final classic symbolic action that we always talk about in terms of Yirmiyahu, and that is Hanamel's field. I'm going to tell, we don't have a lot of, we're over time, so I'll say it quickly, right? So the classic thing, so they are actually at this point, they're under siege. Jerusalem is under siege. Hanamel, Yirmiyahu's cousin, comes to him and says, I need you I need you. You have to buy my field in Anatot, right? You're the Goel. You need to buy it, right? In other words, what's the idea? What does the idea seem to be? The idea seems to be that he's got to sell the field. He can't afford to keep the field. He has to sell it. So the person who's supposed to buy it is the closest family member, right? So he's like, Yirmiyahu, you've got to buy the field from me, right? Because you're the Goel. You're the closest. You're the redeemer. All right, and God says to him, this is what's going to happen. He says, Hanamel is going to come and tell you to buy his field because you have you have the rule of redemption to buy this field. All right. And that's exactly what he does. He comes to the courtyard, right, where Yirmiyahu is imprisoned, right? This is the thing. So that Jerusalem's under siege. Yirmiyahu is imprisoned in what's called Chatzar HaMatara, right? In the court of a guarded courtyard, right? Which is next to the palace. So Yirmiyahu is imprisoned, okay? The city's under siege. Hananel comes to Yirmiyahu and says, buy this field for me because you've got the law of redemption, right? And God tells him when you do that, you need to buy it, right? He's got to buy it. So he buys it. So he gives him 17 shekels, right, for this field at a time when they're at war, Jerusalem's under siege, and Yirmiyahu is in prison, and he buys his field from Hanamel. Okay. He does everything right. He writes the contract. He measures out the silver. He has the wrapped up the internal contract and it's probably written on like the envelope of the clay or something, the external, right, that you can already see, and he has it. And he gives it to his scribe Baruch ben Neriah in front of Hanamel, in front of all the witnesses, and he says, and he commands Baruch, and this is all in front of people. This is the important thing. Le'eineihem. This is in front of people, in front of all these witnesses who see him buy this field at this absolutely absurd time to buy a field. Right? It's crazy. It's craziness to buy a field now. All right. כה אמר אדוני צבאות אלוהי ישראל, לקוח את הספרים האלה, את ספר המקנה הזה, ואת החתום, ואת ספר הגלוי הזה, נבדתם בכלי חרס, למען יעמדו ימים רבים. He put this contract into a clay vessel, right, so that it stays for a long time. So probably, I don't think that it's probably a scroll, and they're rolling it up and they're putting it into a clay vessel and let it stay so that it'll survive for a long time. Why? Right? Because God says houses and fields and vineyards will still be bought in this land. What does that mean? Again, this is the time we're switching to hope, right? Remember before, don't marry, because don't have kids here because they're all going to die, right? You're in Babylon, build houses there. No, now we get to now we're at the point where they're under siege. They know what's going to happen. Jerusalem's under siege. It's the end. And now is the time for hope. Houses will yet be bought. Houses and fields will yet be bought in this land, right? And Yirmiyahu actually is like, he's puzzled. He's like, God, I know you have all this power, et cetera, and I'm switching to verse Chaf Hey to verse 25. V'ata amarta elai Adonai Elohim knei lecha hasadeh b'kesef va'ed edim v'ha'ir nitna b'yad hakasdim. And he's like, God, you told me buy this field with silver and have witnesses to it. And the city is being given over to the Babylonians. And God says, Hine ani Adonai Elohei kol basar hamimeni yipaleh kol davar. And God said, I am the God of all flesh. Is anything too wondrous for me? Okay. And then he explains, he says, yes, the city is going to fall to the Babylonians because of the sins of the people, but eventually, right? Eventually, they're going to come back. Eventually, I'm going to V'hineni mikabtsa mikol haratzot asher hidachtim sham ba'pi ubachamati ubeketzav gadol v'shivotim el makom hazeh v'shavtim levetach. I'm going to. There's going to be a future time when I'm going to gather everyone, right, and bring them back and have them dwell safely. They'll be my nation and I'll be their God, right? And then of course there's the rebirth. I'm going to give them one. I'm going to have this kind of renewal of, again, this relationship between God and his people. Maybe we'll have a class just about all these renewals that we have and how the different prophets describe this kind of renewal, this future renewal of the relationship, and how the nation's going to change. I'm going to have a new covenant with them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And that's why you're buying this field. Why are you buying this field? Not because the city won't fall to the Babylonians. The city will fall to the Babylonians. But after that, there will be a return, right? Note how symbolic this action is, because Yirmiyahu is never going to return. Is Yirmiyahu ever going to be able to enjoy that field? He will not, right? But the idea is to show everyone there will be a future. There will be a future beyond the exile, which is actually pretty amazing, particularly if you're in Yehuda and you saw the northern exile, because there was nothing after that exile, right? They're gone. So this idea that you will return is a big deal. And this is, stop the share. And this is the point of this other symbolic action where in contrast with this idea that Yirmiyahu is not supposed to marry and have kids. Don't marry and have kids because they're all going to die, right? But at this point, when the city is under siege, yes, buy that field. Buy that field, make sure it's witnessed, write a contract, make it really, really official. Why? Because it means something. In the future, houses and fields will be bought. Right? In the future, there is a future in this land, just not an immediate future, right? And so this symbolic action is again supposed to be done by Yirmiyahu in front of people. And yet we are kind of going back to the idea that we had with the loincloth and that we had with the potter's wheel, which is that the first person who's got to get this is Yirmiyahu. And we can tell that because Yirmiyahu doesn't get it. Yirmiyahu's like, I don't understand, God. Like, I understand you created all these things, you're tremendously powerful, but the city's under siege. The Babylonians are going to take us now. Why are you telling me to buy this field? And the answer is because, right, yes, you're going to fall to the Babylonians, but there's a future. There's a future. And so here also, it seems important that the first person to understand this has to be Yirmiyahu himself. Even though he's doing this in front of other people, the first person to understand it has to be Yirmiyahu. This has to be an idea that sinks in. Susan says the first recorded distressed real estate purchase. I could respond to that if I knew more about real estate. But yeah, it's funny. What's the funny thing is that Hanamel even tries it. Like if I had a cousin in jail in a city under siege, that's a lot of chutzpah to go up to him and say, hey, buy my field, right? It's like, that's a lot of mental steps you're making there that you're like, you must really think Yirmiyahu is a great cousin, because like, that's above and beyond. But anyway, so I think we saw in Yirmiyahu kind of the whole range of symbolic actions, both for others and especially for the prophet himself, where this is supposed to actually create an understanding for the prophet. And also how even the juxtaposition of two symbolic actions, which you saw with the potter's wheel versus the created ceramic jug, can actually show us the switch in what's possible now. What's the prophecy saying? Is the prophecy saying that you can still change things, or is the prophecy saying no, that's it? It's completely done. So I hope you enjoyed this class. And next class, we are going to jump into Yechezkel's symbolic actions, which are super wild and fun to talk about. So I hope
just one last thing.
Yes.
There's a line in this year's Hayudim Ba'im that encapsulates 90% of Yirmiyahu, and that's Ani bimkomchem lo haiti koneh bananot yirukot.
That's cool.
But then again, in continuation to this, Yirmiyahu is also the prophet of Odishama B'arei Yehuda.
That's right. That's right. You have that switch with Yirmiyahu. You really have that switch from the prophets. And again, the switch is once everyone understands that they're going down. Once it's clear to everyone that it's the end, then they need comfort and they need hope, right? And they need these other prophecies. They're going to say, but there is a future, and it's as surprising in the context as the prophecies of destruction were. The same way they thought Jerusalem can't fall, and they're like, how can he say it's going to be destroyed? Once it's actually falling, how can he say we're going to come back, right? Because they don't have a precedent for coming back. And that in itself is a tremendous promise. So that is something to think about. So thanks for joining me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, and have a happy Purim.